KFI AM 640. It's later with Mo Kelly. We're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I was going home last night listening to George Norrie, just in my head, just thinking about random things, thinking about what the next show was going to be. It's hard for me to turn off my mind. And I got home, and then I started looking through the news and looking through the stories, and then up popped the story of Gene Hackman. I don't remember what time it was, but I remember it was late last night. And I just put up the post on my personal Facebook page, like, is this real? It just didn't seem real. We always talk about things which are unreal. Gene Hackman, even though he had left public life, we didn't think that there was anything wrong with him, that he was necessarily ill. He would pop up every now and then because there was some paparazzo who would take a picture of him and it would end up in the tabloids. But we didn't think that the story would end like this. We know all stories have to end, but we didn't know his was supposed to end like this. And I say this, not knowing what this is. We had the initial report that Hackman, his wife, and one of his dogs, not all of his dogs, but one of his dogs were found deceased. They had been dead for some time, and I don't know what that means, more than a day from certain published accounts. Originally, law enforcement, or at least it was said publicly, that foul play had been ruled out. Then it was later changed to suspicious, and we're learning more and more that there's more to this story. In fact, I didn't even know that I was going to talk about this at the top of the show until maybe 2 minutes ago. There's more to the story, and I don't know what it is, so I'm not even going to speculate. I'm going to let law enforcement and the coroner do their jobs, and then we'll go from there. But to find Gene Hackman deceased in this manner at this time, just days before the Oscars, it's real difficult to separate the two in an emotional sense. This is the time where the best and the brightest, the greatest, the most legendary when it comes to movies are featured. And I don't know if there was anyone bigger still living, with the exception maybe of Jack Nicholson in an actor sense, than Gene Hackman, who had won 2 Academy Awards, been nominated another 3 times. Probably top 3 actor of our generation and some. I'll defer to Mark Ronner. I'll take his opinion over mine. But I can't think of anyone, really.
Everybody loved Gene Hackman.
Yes, and that's not an exaggeration. Everybody. He was a consummate actor. He was a consummate talent. I never met him. I have no personal anecdotes to share. But from what I saw on screen, if someone said Gene Hackman is the greatest actor ever, I'll hear that argument. I will listen to that conversation because there's a lot of evidence to support it.
Well, he acted like him, and he was impossible not to like. He reminded me an awful lot of Spencer Tracy. There was nobody like him. They weren't conventionally movie star, godlike, handsome looking, but they were both extremely masculine in their own way and charismatic, and there was just nobody exactly like them. So if you like them, you're going to like them in whatever you watch them in. They were not chameleons.
Yeah, I got the sense that Gene Hackman tolerated Hollywood, but he loved acting. And there's a difference.
People were afraid of him, like physically afraid of him. There's all sorts of stories of him buttonholing people, and they don't know if he's going to smack them or not.
He had such an imposing presence on and off screen, from what I could tell. We know what it was on screen, but off screen, he was an imposing figure from what I hear.
Ex-Marine. Not a lot of actors were Marines.
Which, at one point, we will get into Crimson Tide and the importance of that movie and that particular performance, which for me, next to maybe the French Connection, will always stand out. French Connection is at the top for me. But then you have Crimson Tide. And then I would say 3 or C, depending on how you list it, would be Lex Luthor, Superman 2.
Reasonable people can disagree, but there's not a stinker in the bunch.
Well, I like Superman 2 because it showed the comedic side of Gene Hackman that we don't always get to see, didn't always get to see.
Well, he had to lobby for comedic roles. I had read something that Mel Brooks wrote about Hackman appearing as the old blind man in Young Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. Everybody just assumed that Hackman was only going to do tough stuff, and he wanted to do comedy, but he was already getting typecast before then, and then after that, people realized, oh yeah, this guy can do anything.
But he was the actor's actor, so yeah, it makes sense. He was well versed. He was obviously competent in the various disciplines of acting. But when you hear the stories, and I've heard some of them as well, as far as he wanted to have a broader scope of roles in which he would do, and he was to think that, Gene Hackman would be typecast. Yes, he was always irascible. He was the curmudgeon. He was always steel-faced and very serious in his presentation.
And also a bad guy a lot. He really paid his dues. You see some 60s TV, like the old FBI show with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. He'll turn up in that stuff as a bad guy.
This, for me, is saddening because when you have such genuine affection for someone and their talent, again, never knew him, you don't want the story to end like this in this way, regardless of what more we may learn. I would have rather it was without a cloud of mystery. I would have rather that we would have all had the opportunity to emotionally prepare. Obviously, this came out of absolutely nowhere, and I'm not going to speak on the specifics, if only because I'm not so sure. What we know right now is what we'll feel about it and what we'll think about it a week from now. What happens now, we'll wait for the investigation. I don't know what to think about how long. At this point, we know that it was more than a day that he and his wife were found deceased, the time in between. There have been other items, depending on the media that you read, as to whether there was like a bottle of pills on the table near them. And I'm not getting into that. I'm just saying I'm aware of those reports. But we'll know more in the coming days and weeks. And I don't think we need to hurry up and find out everything in the first 24 hours. It's okay if we wait for the autopsy. It's okay if we wait for the toxicology and get a better sense of what may have transpired leading to this moment. We have the Oscars on Sunday. I don't know how the Oscars will plan to address it. They will have to. I'm quite sure someone will come up on stage and address it if the Academy does not. But this is just a weird time for Hollywood in general. You knew that the Oscars were coming up. You knew that they were going to focus on the fires and how many people in that room, including Conan O'Brien, who's hosting, have been affected by the fires. And I'm sure this is something else which is going to, in my estimation, severely mute the celebration or the celebratory aspect of what the Oscars usually are. When you get a little bit older, like me, Mark, you're not my age yet, but once you get a little older, young whippersnapper.
Yes, father.
You tend to think about the things that you lose and the people that you lose. And up until a day or so ago, I had not known a day on this earth without Gene Hackman in the sense of his talent and presence. And now to know that he's gone, you think like, how is that possible? Yes, I know he was 95. He had obviously more life behind him than in front of him, but still you feel the enormity of his loss. And I know I'm not the only one. Well,
95 is a good long run, and you can tell that journalism outlets were prepared for it with the boilerplate that they had written up ahead of time, like they do. I'm sure there's
everybody.
There's one at every major news outlet for William Shatner and any actor who's still with us in their 90s. But you're the one who first told me about this last night when you sent a text. And as much as they were expecting a 95-year-old actor could leave us at any moment, they weren't expecting the way it panned out.
No, not at all. I'll have more on this in just a moment. It's later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. And before we go to break, in light of his passing, Gene Hackman's passing, obviously Name That Movie Called Classic tomorrow will be all about Gene Hackman. We got plenty to choose from. It's not about trying to deceive you or trick you. It's going to be some of the best of Gene Hackman. We will be giving away prizes. I don't know, maybe Mark Ronner will be able to throw in some anecdotes that he knows and only he knows Did you ever get a chance to interview him?
Not him, but William Friedkin, obviously, because I'm weirdly obsessed with Friedkin. And I asked him a lot about, of course, the French Connection, for God's sake. And, Hackman wasn't even the first choice to play Popeye Doyle in that. It was a newspaper columnist named Jimmy Breslin. Turned out Breslin couldn't act. And so they brought in Hackman, who was uncomfortable with some of that stuff, especially, Popeye Doyle says some kind of salty, racially tinged things when he's shaking people down. But Friedkin convinced him, no, this is who this guy is. You're acting. This is a part. You got to do this.
That's why we have Mark Ronner. He's a wealth of information. KFI AM 640. We are live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
And before the break, I was going back and forth with Mark Ronner, our in-house resident movie historian, talking about the untimely passing, even though he was 95 years old, the untimely passing of Gene Hackman, 2-time Academy Award winner, 5-time nominated, 3 Golden Globe wins. And I was making the argument, you could make the argument that he's the greatest actor of our time, and I would listen to others if you thought maybe Jack Nicholson or Morgan Freeman. I'll hear all that, but I'm saying if you told me Gene Hackman, I would say, yeah, I'd buy that. I'd allow that. And before the break, I was talking about some of the things and scenes and movies which appealed to me. I had mentioned Crimson Tide, obviously the French Connection, and I had an epiphany during the commercial break. Mark, tell me what you think about this. I think we become emotional when certain actors or entertainers pass because there's usually a familial connection. What I mean by that is when I think of Gene Hackman and others, but specifically Gene Hackman, I think of my father who pointed me to the French Connection saying, you have to see this movie. So there's always that type of tie-in with these entertainers. Do you think that flies? I
think a good actor is like a good radio host in that they make you feel instantly like you know them when you don't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, I was thinking about Hackman as well during the break and looking up some stuff that I'd even forgotten that he was in that I loved. Like Mississippi Burning became one of my touchstone movies. For the way he charges down the stairs and just slaps the living daylights out of Willem Dafoe. That became a common threat for me with other people. Like, I'm going to Mississippi Burning you. I'm going to slap you like that.
He had this presence which just filled up the screen. And another one of my favorite movies was The Quick and the Dead.
Yeah.
He's just a great villain, great actor. His screen presence was otherworldly.
It's not many actors who can really play a hero and a villain just as good. He was the hero in what I think now is kind of trashy, The Poseidon Adventure, but he was terrific in that. You don't begrudge him playing that at all because he takes what might seem kind of like a cheesy, silly, low rent type of thing, and he imbues it with some dignity and some machismo. It's really fun.
He was great to me in The Firm with Tom Cruise.
I haven't seen that since it came out.
I actually rewatched it, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Because I was pulling clips for Name That Movie Called Classic, and you see a clip, and then it makes you want to go back and rewatch the movie. I don't know if there was a time in which he mailed it in. Maybe he did, but he fooled me if he ever did. I don't know of a time in which it's like, oh, he just took the paycheck on this one. And there are a lot of actors you can tell who may have been great at one time in their career, and then after a certain point, they're just compiling paychecks to maintain their lifestyle. I didn't feel that way about Gene Hackman, and I think it bore itself out when he decided to just leave Hollywood and leave public life for the remaining 20 years of his life. I never got the sense that he was acting because he liked Hollywood. I just got the sense that he didn't like Hollywood, but he loved the hell out of acting.
Well, he certainly had nothing left to prove. And he was part of that generation that started in the 60s, but really came to prominence, like Robert Duvall in the early 70s during that new Hollywood movement where, filmmakers, directors were kind of taking chances, departing from the formulas. And he was in a really terrific one called Night Moves that you must see if you haven't seen it. Night Moves. It's kind of a neo-noir movie.
Was that late 70s, wasn't it?
I think early mid, but I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah, I want to think it was mid to late 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, his credit list is so massive, you can't just look at it in one screen. It really, I'll find it.
It's 75.
Well done. Thank you.
1975. That's my contribution for the evening.
No, well done. If you haven't seen Night Moves, you're going to love it.
And I was saying at the beginning of the segment, there's usually a familial connection. I remember my whole family sitting down in the early days of VHS and Beta watching Superman 2. We didn't see it in theaters. We saw it on video when it was released to home video. And we watched it together, and we all just loved, because Christopher Reeves was not the household name at that point. It was Gene Hackman.
Oh, yeah.
He was when I say the star, he was the pull. It's like you got the Gene Hackman to play Lex Luthor. Yes, it was a sequel for Superman, but still, he was the biggest star in the world at that time.
It's like putting Harrison Ford in the latest Cap movie with Anthony Mackie. You've got somebody up and coming in it, but then you've got the superstar right there to give it the gravitas.
Yeah, look, if we were to sit here and just go through his whole list of films, did you ever see The French Connection 2? I don't think I did.
I think John Frankenheimer directed that, and it wasn't really well regarded, but you still got to see it if you like the first one. Because that's the one, I think, where they get Popeye Doyle strung out on the junk.
Something like that. I think I've seen it, but I don't remember, or maybe I just don't want to remember. He had his moments where he would do some comedy. We had talked about that. He was on Laugh-In. I vaguely remember the episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did he do on Laugh-In?
I have to look it up, but I know it says here he was on twice. I remember my own memory once that he was on Laugh-In. So he had comedic chops. You're not going on Laugh-In to do a dramatic presentation.
Oh, no. And one of his last movies, The Royal Tenenbaum, is one of the funniest movies of the decade it was in. And he was terrific in it. If that had been his swan song, that would have been perfectly acceptable.
If there's anything that I appreciate about how he ran his career, is that he left on his own terms. And my memory of him as an actor was Gene Hackman at his peak, and all the various other actors that he may have instructed, tutored along the way, from Denzel Washington, Crimson Tide, to even Will Smith in Enemy of the State.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah, I saw that, but it was not at the forefront of my mind because I'm just not a giant Will Smith fan, but I am a giant Gene Hackman fan.
But see, that's my point. I saw that movie Enemy of the State because Gene Hackman was in it.
Yeah.
Not because of Will Smith. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Will Smith, they could have put any young and up-and-coming actor, once again, in that role. And since you have the elder statesman of Gene Hackman, the movie makes sense. You want to see the movie. Let me see. Enemy of the State was 1998. So that was when Will Smith was coming into his real level of prominence. I guess it was after Independence Day, if I'm not mistaken. But still, Gene Hackman in 1998 was Gene Hackman.
Well, one great thing is he's left behind such a magnificent catalog of movies to discover. And even I haven't seen all of them. And I keep on running across ones that I haven't on the streaming services. Like I watched a couple of years ago one called March or Die from 1977. Again, not complete blockbuster top 10 material during the years they came out, but well worth your time now.
Tomorrow, Mark, you and I were talking about what you were going to do tomorrow for your Rana report. Is there any type of Gene Hackman tie-in?
Well, I have kind of a juvenile fascination with people who shout well. And I was just thinking about all of them, like Hoosiers. You remember Hoosiers?
Of course I do. I'm surprised we didn't mention it sooner.
Yeah. nobody to me shouts better than him. And I was going to put together a top 10 list of Hackman shouting scenes, but I don't know. I'm just going to go home and see what strikes my fancy tonight, because looking through his filmography, there are so many things. Cisco Pike from 1971, I hadn't even watched until about 6 months ago. Another terrific one where he's a jerk cop trying to manipulate Chris Christopherson. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I just remembered one of my favorite movies. Also, another example of he being the elder statesman when this young up and coming actor, No Way Out, Kevin Costner.
Yes. Yeah.
With the whole twist at the end.
Yeah. I love that movie when it came out. 1987. My God, we're old. We're so old.
I remember I was a senior in high school, and no, I just started my freshman year in college, because they filmed all that in DC, and there were a lot of recognizable places in DC that back then you're like, oh, that's the Rhode Island Mall or something like that. There are a lot of recognizable, identifiable places because Kevin Costner played a young Navy officer.
I wind up seeing bits and pieces of that fairly often because it's kind of in heavy rotation, or the long suffering one will put it on. She rewatches things a lot more than I do. That holds up so well. It's really good. No Way Out, 1987.
As a matter of fact, if people were to watch it right now, the storyline not only holds up, but it will be almost, you would think it's prescient as far as what's happening in politics today. And not to give it away, because the premise is Kevin Costner plays this young naval officer, and the Navy is supposedly looking for this character named Yuri, who is either a double agent or a plant, a mole, somewhere within the Pentagon. And after a certain point, they start looking at Kevin Costner. And if you think about the geopolitical landscape today, watch that movie and think about what's going on today, and you'll think, oh, yeah, that could happen.
Yeah, that was back when we were against Russia. I want to recommend one more movie before we move on.
Sure.
From 1990, it's a remake of an old action film noir called Narrow Margin, directed by Peter Hyams, who did some of these great 80s and 90s action adventure films.
I don't think I saw that one. What was that one about?
It's about a detective on a long train ride with people after him. That's all you need to know. It's a train movie. It's terrific.
It's Peter Hyams. He did all the best action movies.
Capricorn One and all those. He does not get his due. And I think Peter Hyams might still be with us as well.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640. We are live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
And the theme for this segment is going to be, oh, hells no. What? Mo, what are you talking about? This is what I mean. Elon Musk has taken to his megaphone, better known as X/Twitter, and he is literally begging retired air traffic controllers to return to work. Say it with me. Oh, hells no. This is a real story. Now, you know that Elon Musk and Doge have fired hundreds of workers connected to the FAA. Not air traffic controllers, but more than 130 people who were fired held jobs that directly or indirectly supported the air traffic controllers, facilities, and technologies that the FAA uses to keep planes and their passengers safe. In other words, Elon Musk and Doge, after firing probably a lot of people, friends and colleagues of these retired air traffic controllers, is asking these same air traffic controllers to come back to work, come out of retirement, and likely just being worked worse because they won't have the support staff, because those individuals have already been fired and probably mistreated as well as the other FAA employees, which have already been fired. What would be the motivation for someone to come out of retirement at the behest of someone who has gutted your agency? Say it with me.
I'll tell you.
Oh, hells no.
It's the fact that the same person who gutted the agency might soon be gutting Social Security, so you don't get any retirement.
You wouldn't be able to get me back, if only because if I retired, I retired for a reason. That was a conscious decision. And I know, put it this way, How you do other people is I know how you're going to do me. If I see a company fires people in a certain way, I know that's going to happen to me when I'm ultimately fired. It does not matter where I work. It is a function of I watch how you treat others. I know then how you'll treat me. And Doge has unceremoniously fired hundreds of FAA workers, and that's not even including the other federal agencies which they're gutting. I think they fired 800 NOAA employees today.
Yeah, and don't forget about the Ebola fiasco as well. He got rid of the people in charge of dealing with that and then decided maybe we need those people. By the way, the mandatory retirement age of air traffic controllers is pretty young.
56, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's very young.
How much have we talked about how air traffic controllers were both overworked and understaffed? You would think before you started firing people, be it support staff or ancillary employees, that you would make sure at least you had the core necessary individuals in place to make sure the agency itself could stand on its own. Instead, you were firing people willy-nilly, and then you realize, oh, maybe we should actually be hiring some air traffic controllers. And now you'll have probably a tepid response at best, because if you're retired, you probably want to stay retired, and you probably retired for a reason, and you won't have the support staff to help them. I don't know how you can un-F this situation, because this was avoidable. You didn't have to dig this hole in all these agencies. And reminder, they have not shown or demonstrated actual fraud. They've just fired people. There's a difference. It's one thing to say, okay, this is waste, this is bloat, this is government largesse. But at the same time, if you don't show it to us, there's no reason for us to believe you. And so now we have clearly a hole in the FAA, as admitted by Elon Musk, as he said that he wanted to, quote, there's a shortage of top-notch air traffic controllers. If you have retired but are open to returning to work, please consider doing so, close quote.
It's not a coinky-dink that we've had some major air incident almost every day. I'm seeing 94 so far in the year on Google.
All I'm saying, and as I've said it before, firing people does not increase the safety quotient. Firing all the people, be it staff support or people who are working in concert with air traffic controllers, although they weren't air traffic controllers, does not make the overall flying apparatus more safe. And clearly, this is an admission that you, at the minimum, need more air traffic controllers. If you had worked for the FAA, why in the world would you try to go back there if you're retired? Why would you want to put up with that? Why would you want to put yourself in a situation where clearly you're going to be overworked, underappreciated, understaffed, and still maybe fired at the end? Because the other 300 people have already been fired. You probably knew some of them. How you do other people is probably how you're going to do me. It's Later with Mo Kelly, KFI AM 640, live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. Oh, Mark, am I like psychic or something? Did I say that the measles epidemic was probably going to get larger? I remember saying that. I was there when I said it.
Yeah, it really takes somebody with precognitive abilities to figure that stuff out now, doesn't it?
Damn it. Let me just take credit for it and break my arm patting myself on the back. And I don't say this trying to be funny. Let me be serious. When we come back, we have to talk about how measles has now spread to Kentucky and New Jersey that we know of.
You can be serious, but I still want you to start wearing a Karnak turban to work.
You know, they don't know anything about the great Karnak.
Oh, stop. Everybody does.
Do you have an envelope that can hold up to my head?
That's for Tawala to do. He's your Ed McMahon.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
And over the course of the week, I told you about how measles had been spreading in Texas and other states. And I said, this is going to grow. This is going to continue because people have adopted a new mentality when it comes to vaccines, saying nothing of COVID vaccine, talking about the more traditional ones, such as the MMR, which was sent out in 1963, was first used in 1963 and improved since that time. I told you about the history of measles had been effectively eradicated in the United States as of the year 2000. But because of this outbreak and changing attitudes towards vaccines, we're going to have to deal with measles all around the country. And I mean that, all around the country. 2 new measles cases have been linked to a child in New Jersey. And it turns out that the 2 new infections are the parents of the unvaccinated child. And the problem is we know that the incubation period can be as many as 21 days. There's no telling where the 3 of them, the parents and the child, have been, how many people they've been in contact with. We've already had 1 child die due to measles. It's going to grow in New Jersey. And we also know that Kentucky has announced its first confirmed measles case since 2023. But listen to the specifics. Late last night, state health officials in Kentucky confirmed the first case of measles since February of 2023 in an adult, check this out, Mark, who attended a Planet Fitness class in Frankfurt. Officials with the Kentucky Department of Public Health say the Kentucky resident recently traveled internationally to an area with ongoing measles transmission. I don't have to remind people that Kentucky is probably has one of the lowest vaccination rates across the board in the country, including measles. I don't have to remind you how many people are in a gym on a given day. And this is an airborne pathogen. And people are sharing air, sharing equipment, sharing pools.
Gyms are one of the worst super spreader locations that you can go to because of the way people are breathing heavily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that stuff hangs in the air for 2 hours. 2
hours. Yeah. I'm willing to believe that a fair percentage of people in the gym might have also been unvaccinated. And I keep reminding people, if you are unvaccinated, you come in contact with someone who has the measles, there's a 9 in 10 chance that you're going to catch measles. And then you're going to spread it. And so on and so on. Quote, measles is one of the most contagious viruses in the world. Close quote. That's the Kentucky Department of Public Health. But also they say, quote, fortunately, measles can be prevented with the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, which is safe and effective. Vaccines are an essential tool to keep children and adults safe and healthy. Close quote, Mark Ronner. I don't know how many more times I can say the same damn thing over and over again.
Well, we've got a lot to fight against because there is a lot of anti-vax disinformation out there. And look at who's been appointed the head of the HHS, a notorious anti-vaxxer.
No.
There are consequences to this stuff. And it's such a massive self-own to be plagued with something that we had essentially eradicated a quarter century ago. This didn't have to happen.
This is 100% avoidable. This is not about chance. This is not about bad luck. This is 100% avoidable. Nobody needs to die from measles, especially here in the United States. We're not a third world country where we have contaminated water or we have insufficient medical supplies and they have to ship in all those things every single year to keep people alive, along with food. This is the United States of America. This is a choice that we're making collectively as people and citizens here. We do not have to have any children dying from measles, much less even contracting measles. This does not have to happen. The same with mumps and rubella and whooping cough. And at this point, chicken pox.
Well, don't forget COVID. That's still killing between 700 and 1,000 people a week in the United States. And we're pretending like that's over.
No, they're pretending like it's a fake disease and it doesn't exist. There's a difference.
I got news for you.
No. There's a difference. To believe that it's over is at least acknowledging that 1 million Americans died because of it. And we won't even, as a country, agree upon that because we don't agree on facts anymore.
It's not American exceptionalism that we had so many more people by an order of magnitude than any other industrialized nation. That's shameful.
Unfortunately, we have, pun intended, infected our science discussions with politics. Unfortunately, we have chosen to align ourselves with political beliefs as opposed to actual factual science. Measles has been stopped. The only reason that we have a measles outbreak in America is because people refuse to be vaccinated against it. The only reason that one child has died so far is because people refuse to be vaccinated against measles. This is completely avoidable. And here's the real unfortunate part. You want to inject, a pun intended, politics into this, Mark? Imagine if I told you the story of one person dying because of an illegal immigrant.
Elon Musk?
No, I'll just say like Lake and Riley. People would be running over themselves to make sure that we change the law so not one person died because of an illegal immigrant. But it's okay if children die from measles.
Perspective is key here. And if children dying doesn't get your attention and make you want to shape up and fly right when it comes to the consumption of deadly disinformation, what kind of person are you?
The person who's going to watch other children die. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
Untangling the mess until it makes sense.
KFI.
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.
Live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.